Where's the one I want to share? So,
Scott, we are recording at this point.
thank you. Okay, hi everybody. You should be seeing my screen with the great egret on it. Is that correct? Everybody seeing that? Give me a thumbs up, someone, if you're seeing that. Thank you, Autumn. Okay, just wanted to be sure. So welcome. It is April. Oh my God, it is spring and spring migration is starting and there's some cool birds out there. So be sure you're out there to see them. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a great evening planned for you. We also have some business we have to take care of. And we're going to get to that business first because this is, besides having our featured presenter of the month and having, of course, our bird of the month, we are also having our annual meeting. And that always takes place in April. So for that annual meeting, we always both do a election for our board members. Usually it's half the board gets elected every other year. And you'll see that in a moment. And we also have our annual budget for 22-23. And by the way, before I even switch to the next slide, which will tell you the new board nominees, I just want to let you know that the nominating committee, who Natasha Warwick is the chair of, and she will be presenting that, host, they have vetted all the nominees, and then they presented them to the Audubon Everglades Board of Directors. And we voted unanimously to approve them for you guys to vote on tonight. So let's get started, and let me give you Natasha Warch, who is our nominating committee chair. So Natasha, if you would like to unmute yourself and speak, I will also pin you so everybody can see you can see you clearly.
All right, thank you for telling me to unmute myself because I forgot that step. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to real briefly go over our nominees for this year. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Kathy, who is stepping down as our recording secretary. She's served us faithfully for 6 years. I don't know what we would have done without her. So thank you to Kathy. So up on the nominating slate for this year, we've got Luann Dillon, who has served as our treasurer for several years. She is an amazing woman and we're lucky to have her. Our nominee for recording secretary is Teresa Bierman. She is a teacher in addition to wanting to be part of our Audubon family. I am a nominee for second vice president. And then our director positions, we have two directors who would like to return, Susan Kennedy and Michelle Bashoon. And then two new additions, Charlotte Neville, who also works at the South Florida Water Management District, and Autumn Quixote, who you will remember from last month's meeting, that she was our wonderful facilitator. So these are the members that are up for nominations this year. I hope that you all like them as much as we do. We're very excited to have them on the board.
So the question we usually ask at this time is, are there any nominations from the floor? And remember, to nominate someone, you must be a member and to be a friend of Audubon Everglades, and to be on the board, you must also be a friend of Audubon Everglades according to our bylaws. Okay, so if there's no questions, if there are no questions for Natasha, I would like to bring up a poll so that we can vote on the slate. And one of the things that, for those of you who wish to vote, we only ask that people who are friends of Audubon Everglades vote. If you are not a friend, please abstain from voting.
Scott?
Yes?
Doesn't someone have to move to accept the slate of officers.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And while we're doing this, can we have a motion to accept the slate of officers? Can someone make a motion, please?
I make a motion.
Thank you,
to,
Clive. So Clive
I
Pinnock
second.
makes the motion. Who seconds? Can you say your name?
Luann.
Luann Dillon. Okay, Luann seconds the motion. Thank you, Luann. All those in favor, say aye somehow. Ray, you can
Aye.
Aye.
aye. Any opposed? You can unmute.
Aye.
Say nay.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. Sorry.
Scott,
Yes.
aren't you going to ask people to push the yes or no button?
Yes,
on-
so please, yeah, people are doing that actually. We have 36 yeses already. So please push the, if you're a member, please push the yes button. If you agree to the slate, if you do not agree to the slate, please push the no button.
Yeah, thank you, because I have to have a count.
Yes, yes, and we will. Thank you so much, Kathy, for helping us along. What will we do without you?
You'll be fine, I'm sure.
I don't know. We're gonna have to have you come back for these kind of events. You keep us on track, Kathy.
I try.
All right, I'll give it another few seconds and then we will end the poll so we can continue on. So remember, for those of you who are just coming on, we are voting for the nominating slate, which you see on the screen in front of you. Oops, I just went off it. I apologize. And oh, we have a no. Okay. So I'll give it 10 more seconds and then we will end the poll. All right, so thank you. It's 62 in favor, 1 against. So the nominating slate has been approved, and congratulations to the new members, the new officers, to the Audubon Everglades Board of Directors. And I'm going to show you the poll, everybody, so you can see it. So as you can see, it was 62 in favor and one opposed. And so congratulations, Luann, Teresa, Natasha, Susan, Michelle, Charlotte, and Autumn. You are part of the board for the next 2 years. I'm excited, very excited to work with you all. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Okay. All righty, so let's continue on. So we also, oops, I went too fast. So we'll also have our proposed 22-23 Audubon Everglades budget. And we have our treasurer, Luann Dillon. And by the way, this budget was also approved unanimously by the board of directors. Luann will tell you more about that. And she'll tell you more about the budget. Luann, it's all yours.
Okay. All right, this slide is showing the income side of our budget. As you can see, most of our support comes from you, our members, through your memberships in Audubon Everglades, both through your memberships and through donations. We get some support from National Audubon as well. And this section also shows the income side of our like special field trips from like pelagic and our stewardship class. Okay.
Admin, sorry.
Okay,
Admin.
on expenses are broken into 3 categories. The first of which is administrative, which just includes, you know, our insurance, accounting, and our storage unit, which we have recently just moved to a larger storage unit so that we could have all of our equipment, such as like the burrowing owls, burrows, tools, all the stuff for festivals and things, all in one place.
And if, by the way, everyone, if you look at our current April kite, you'll see a photo in there of the new storage unit with Natasha and Susan Kennedy, who helped along with Mary move our move our items from one unit to another.
Oh, okay, I see a question. The 3,000 for field trips would be the income side, say, if we did a pelagic trip, that would be the fees that we would, the fees that we would charge to cover the expense. So, I mean, that's a situation where we expect the income and the expense to exactly balance out. So hopefully that answers your question. On the program section, that's all of the special projects that we do, both directly for birds and for you, our members. So it includes the support to the burrowing owls and purple martin projects. It includes all of our, well, not all, it includes supporting things like our Christmas bird count compilation dinner. It includes hospitality and all the, including like all the communications, which is the software for the newsletter, the website, hosting the Zoom meetings. So all of that is included in this section, as well, including our monthly meetings and the photography club. It also includes the things like the Pine Jog Teaching Garden. This money was received, part was funded by us and part was funded by grants that we received. So that's all included in this section. And then finally, we have the education section, which covers our conferences, the expense side of our stewardship class, and includes the equipment for our events, festivals, family events, and our partnership with the library. And a new thing that we're having this year is that we're going to attempt this year is internships, and one of which will be used to help support the recording of these Zoom programs and getting them onto the website so that everyone can see them. And so in summary, Scott, you can go to the last screen.
Okay, got it. Whoops, sorry.
Sorry. So our total expenses were just under 57,000, which is a little, of which just under 34,000 was covered by our projected income. And the difference is funded from grants that we've already received but not spent, and money from the Parmalee bequest that we received several years ago. So does anyone have any particular questions?
I'm not seeing any in the chat, Luann.
Okay.
Okay, so if that's the case, I'm going to present. So can I have a motion? I remember this time, Kathy. Can I have a motion to accept the budget for 22-23, please?
I make a motion that we accept it.
Thank you, Clive. And can we have a second, please?
I second Mark Slifkin.
Okay, Mark Slifkin seconds the motion. Thank you, Mark. All those in favor, please say aye, or you can use the little symbol on the bottom and give us a thumbs up.
Aye.
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 Okay, any nays? Okay, so if that's the case, yes,
Do you
I'm
have-
sorry.
Do you have a poll as you
Yes, I do. I do. I'm
officers,
sorry.
Please, yes.
Okay, let me share the poll right now, please, with you.
Since I can't see everybody, just get these.
Okay, so the poll is up. The poll is up. Please vote yes if you approve of the budget, and of course, no if you do not. Thank you for voting. I see everybody's getting their votes in really quickly this time. And remember, it's only Friends of Audubon Everglades that can vote on this. That is, again, part of our bylaws. And it's only Friends also who can be part of the board as well. Thank you. I'll give it another 30 seconds. I'll give it a minute in total. Whoops. Okay, we have it past a minute. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results with you so you can see. So as you can see on the poll, we had 65 approved and we had 1 dissenting, no dissentings. So we had unanimous approval of the budget. Thank you everyone for voting on that. And thank you, Luann, for presenting and on the budget, and Natasha for introducing the nominations. And by the way, Luann also chaired the budget committee. And as I said earlier, Natasha chaired the nomination committee. On the nomination committee with Natasha were Paul Davis and Dr. Mark Cook. And on the budget committee with Luann were Kathy Hansen, Robert Franzino, and am I missing somebody? And Robin Bennett?
Robin.
Yeah, Robin Bennett, thank you. So those were the members of our nomination of our budget committee. Again, thank you all of you for your hard work. I know how much time this takes. And again, we are an all volunteer organization. And so it is all of our volunteer time that we are putting in to make this happen. Thank you again. Okay. Okay. Let's just see. Okay, so let's continue. So, whoops, I'm going too fast. All right, some special announcements. So we have our April kite is out. We are again kind of altering our format slightly, and you'll see hopefully a big difference in the next couple of months, in which each of the articles will have its own separate URL. So you'll be able to download it to a Facebook page or somewhere else. We can post it on our website. And so you'll be getting the newsletter as opposed to as a PDF. You'll be getting it as a newsletter where you'll be able to click on any of the articles and they will open for you so you can read any article you want, and you'll be able to share those articles with your friends or family or the world, actually, on the internet if you would like to. So that's one of the things we are really looking forward to. And thank you, Sabina Beck, who is our communication chair and vice president, for working on that and hopefully getting that in motion very soon. So as you can see, these are the articles in this month's kite. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at it. Field trips, we are starting to pare down our field trips for the year. Both Flamingo Quest trips are full. They filled up very, very quickly. We know that many of you wanted to attend, and we are sorry that you were not able to, but the district, South Florida Water Management District, who we've been partnering with for many years on field trips to the STAs on another South Florida water management property. We could only do 2 field trips this year as opposed to in past years, or we've done more for the Flamingo Quest when they were available, because there was such a massive amount of construction going on at STA2 that staff has to be involved in the field trip. So that means staff has to give up their own free time to help us and basically lead the field trips to get us through the construction that's going on there. So because of that, we were only able to schedule 2 field trips. And fortunately, as you can see, Dr. Mark Cook and Natasha Warich volunteered to do the first field trip on the 9th, and on the 16th, Brian Garrett, who we've worked with for many years, also, and who's Natasha's boss, by the way, also volunteered to do one of our field trips there. But hopefully in the future, once construction stops there and when the flamingos come back, we'll be able to have this wonderful trip again, and you'll be able to get to see the flamingos. And thank you so much for your patience on this. We have a trip to the Robert Hirshhorn Arboretum at FAU Jupiter campus. And by the way, if you've never been there, it's a small little area, but you get a surprising amount of warblers, particularly during migration in that area. And there have been rarities seen there. So that might be an interesting trip to go to, particularly if you live in the north part of the county. We also have a trip to Wethatchee on the 23rd. We already had one there over the weekend, and we had a Peaceful Waters family and kids field trip there as well this past weekend. And if we do schedule any more trips, we will let you know. We are looking at possibly scheduling 1 or 2 trips to like migratory bird areas like Spanish River, but we have not scheduled them yet. But again, we will let you know if we do, so that you will be able to sign up for those. We have some volunteer opportunities as always. We're always looking for help with community outreach. Festivals are beginning again, and we are starting to table at events. We could always use help there. Plants for Birds garden stewards at Pine Jog are always in need, and more good kite writers. So if you're a writer and you want to contribute to our kite, please let us know. And again, we're all volunteers. Everything that you see here, everything that we do, every activity, every program that we support, are all done by volunteers. And so if you want to share the wealth, please volunteer. You can get in touch with us at info@audubon-everglades.org, and we will be happy to have you as part of our volunteer family. I thought I'd give you this cool update on the Purple Martin project. And I know that Shelley is on. Shelley, if you want to chime in at any point, please go ahead and chime in. At least now it's more from what I understand. We monitor actually 11 Purple Martin housing locations in the county, not 10, I was corrected. And I think at least 6 of them have hatchlings now. And from what I understand, this is what Shelley told me earlier, that we had the first hatchling recorded in the United States, which is pretty cool. We also had the first Purple Martin sighting for migration sighted in the United States as well. So it's wonderful that what we are doing here in Palm Beach County, the 11 locations that Shelley, really her leadership has been incredible, that we have been supporting in terms of advising them, helping purchase the Purple Martin housing. The 2 houses at Wethatchee were both purchased by Audubon Everglades. The monitoring that we do at many of these houses, the support that we offer, and all of that really is thanks to Shelley Rosenberg's leadership. Thanks again, Shelley, for the great work that you do. And if you want to get in touch with Shelley, if you want to help out, if you want to volunteer with Purple Martins, she could always use some good hands, and she'll train you. And so you see her address at the bottom there, Shelley Rosenberg at bellsouth.net. So get in touch with Shelley if you want to get involved with those screaming Purple Martins that you see in the picture. Just some conservation news. I've already posted this in the past, but I just want to remind you that the issue with GL Homes wanting to develop the first, which would be the first property on the west side of 441 in the agricultural reserve. This would be a precedent. And of course, that land borders Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, or abuts it, is real close to it. And so it could set a really disturbing precedent for development in that area. So it's really important that our Palm Beach County commissioners know that this is not what the public wants, that this is a bad idea, that we don't want to see this land be developed, that in 1990, when we voted, almost 75% of the county voted to fund the agricultural reserve and purchase property there, that was the will of the voters, and we do not really want that changed. And you can see here on this map where this development would be. It would be right down here in the bottom left corner in that yellow area. So this would be a first. And notice how it's what you see here in green where my mouse is. This is Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. So you see this could be the start in this yellow area here of development, which we do not want to see happen in this. And this would be the line. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. This would be the line that would be west of 441, right down if you drew a line straight down. So please let your commissioners know, and we will put something in the chat to give you the address for that, so that will help. So you can email your commissioners here at BCC at allcommissioners@Palm Beach County, pbcgov.org. You can also attend the meetings, and on the first meeting of every month, that should be, by the way, whoops, I'm sorry about that. The next meeting is actually May 2nd, not April 5th. I should have changed the date there. I apologize. And that will be from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. At 2 p.m. is when you can make public comment. So you can talk about any topic you want. And this would be a wonderful topic to bring up. You get 3 minutes, so use your time wisely. We are also still asking Governor DeSantis to veto the net metering bill, HB 741. It is on his desk. He has not signed it yet. He is getting a tremendous amount of opposition statewide. 35 Audubon chapters sent him a letter, Palm Beach, Audubon Everglades included. And Audubon Florida has an action letter that you can sign on to if you'd like, if you haven't done that already. And I will be posting that in the chat as well soon. So you can just copy that and be able to click on it and then sign on. It is so important, particularly now in a time when we realize how important energy independence is, besides all the other ramifications in terms of reducing pollution and carbon emissions. This is an important industry in our state. Jobs will be lost. Rooftop solar on people's homes will be lost because 80% of what we are allowing for credit to people who have solar will be lost over the next 5 years. So that will basically almost kill rooftop solar in the state if people no longer see a reason to put it on, other than altruism, in the sense that they would be helping to reduce carbon emissions. So please contact Governor DeSantis and let him know how displeased you are with this bill. All right. So again, we are an all-volunteer organization. You saw our budget today. Your membership dollars help support all the things that we do. Our membership drive actually begins in starting next month. I think you'll get an email letting you know that we are starting our membership drive for the 2022-23 year. If you join now, your membership will be advanced to the next year. So don't be afraid to join in April or May, even though it doesn't start till June. And we do appreciate your membership so much because it's you that makes Audubon Everglades happen. Next month, we have a really exciting speaker, Captain Jay Marvin, who heads the Florida Wildlife Commission law enforcement that is involved in illegal trapping of songbirds, will be our speaker. He'll be telling us about some wonderful stories about how they've been able to stop this illegal trapping. There was a bill passed in 2018 where we made it much easier to stop this illegal trapping of songbirds. And since then, there has been a tremendous reduction of songbird trapping. And for some of you who don't know the value of songbirds on the open market, for example, a painted bunting, a male painted bunting with excellent feather conditions can go for as much as $200 on the black market. And even in poor condition, they go for about $100. So it is a very lucrative trade. These trappers use mist nets. They trap them very quickly and they're gone. They can trap it in one location. They can trap 15, 20 buntings and be off. But we've been stopping this, and Captain Jay Marvin will be telling you more about what's been going on statewide to keep these illegal poachers from basically trapping our birds. So we have an upcoming photography group Zoom program on April 18th, Getting the Keeper, which is the shot that you really love, that you want to share with everybody. Guest photographer Don Hamilton, who's a wonderful photographer, will be speaking. And then on May 16th, which will be the last meeting for photography group, there'll be a photo share and summer discussion. So if you have some photos you want to share, remember this is open to any member of AE or any friend of AE. Please register. And you can register, as you can see there on the bottom, at photography@audubon-everglades.org. We will also share that in the chat as well. Okay. If you want to see any of our past programs, including tonight's, or any of our past photography programs, please visit our YouTube channel. You can either get that link, and we will put that in the chat as well, or you can just go to YouTube and type in Audubon Everglades channel, and all of our previous programs for the last couple of years that we've been doing on Zoom will be there, so you'll be able to see them. And some of them are particularly really wonderful to revisit. Okay, we are finally at the bird of the month. Clive and Cece were not able to be here last month, but they are here this month with one of my very favorite ducks. And Clive and Cece will tell you all about it. So Clive and Cece, welcome back. We missed you. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for that great invitation. We missed being with you guys last month as well. Let's see. Working on getting this up. There we go. All right. Okay, as Scott mentioned earlier, our bird of the month is the wonderful, very handsome canvasback. We've got a photograph there of male, and the first thing that really jumps out at you regarding this bird is not only the beautiful colors, that rusty head, the black breast area, the stark white body, and that black sloping tail, but that forehead, sloping forehead leading down to that black bill is one of the most striking and outstanding field marks of this bird. Even in the female, which is seen here in our schematic, you can see that she also has that diagnostic feature to her. These birds are very, very easy to pick up in the field. However, having made that statement, quite often when these birds are spending the winters with us here, they form large flocks or rafts in the thousands, and pretty regularly redheads are mixed in with them. So it can be quite challenging at times to distinguish the canvasbacks from the redheads in flocks that are mixed. Occasionally scaup are mixed in there as well. But again, because the redheads and the canvasbacks are so close in color, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to distinguish these birds, but look for that sloping forehead. The male we can see quite easily. Females, however, are not as stark colored as the males are. They are more gray-brown in color. The head is brownish. They do have that black sloping bill, just like the male does. The body is more gray, and that tail is black on the surface and gray or off-white underneath. These are diving ducks, and having said that, one of the distinguishing features about diving ducks is that their legs and their feet are placed backward. In other words, they're placed closer to the tail than they are in the middle of the body. And you might wonder, well, what would be the purpose for this? As a diving duck, it actually helps these birds propel themselves through the water. And so they're able to have greater propulsion and maneuverability. And so all diving ducks actually have those rare placed legs to help them propel themselves through the water. The range of these ducks, we can see here with the blue, the non-breeding season, they extend quite a bit through the lower 48 states. And for us here in Florida, they're more in large numbers in the panhandle and in the upper half of the peninsula. We very rarely see them below Lake Okeechobee, and no records exist of them being in the Keys at all. So Scott mentioned earlier that he'd seen one at Peaceful Waters, a female, I believe he said it was. And my wife and I have actually seen them when we've gone on birding trips in Merritt Island. So we've had them there. That's the closest that I've actually seen the canvasbacks. But their breeding range extends up into Canada and even up into the Alaskan area. They tend to be quite attracted to prairie lakes and ponds in those regions. And we've got some photographs here that represent some of the typical habitats that these birds frequent during the breeding season. Some of these also overlap as preferred habitats during the winter season as well. In particular, bays and estuaries, they are quite attracted to during the winter. We get them in Florida generally from around November to February. So it's highly unlikely that we would see any now, but they, during the winter months, do prefer coastal regions, estuaries, bays, and things like that. But during the summer breeding season, they are highly attracted to ponds, freshwater lakes, and marshes. Now, even during the winter season, they can be found on large freshwater lakes on the interior, but for the most part, they usually inhabit coastal areas. Now, breeding generally starts early in the spring and late in the winter as they migrate towards their nesting grounds. That is usually when courtship begins. And I kind of jumped ahead of myself here for a little bit. As far as feeding, these birds do primarily feed on aquatic plants. They dive to the bottom and will feed on the leaves, the seeds, the rhizomes, the roots, the tubers of aquatic plants, but their diet is does include some protein as well. And so, as you can see with the adult male on the right, it's feeding on a clam. They will take other types of mollusks like mussels and snails. They will take some fish, as you can see with the shot on the upper left. And they do dive, as I mentioned before, to the bottom of the lakes and ponds that they're frequenting in order to get predominantly to wild celery and other aquatic vegetation that makes up the primary part of their diet. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, they do start courting as they're traveling north on the spring migration. And typically, it's not unusual for several males to attempt to court the same female. However, after all their efforts, usually it's the female that will select one of those courting males. And once she makes her selection, the pair actually goes off, separates from the rest of the flock, and consummate that pair bonding with copulation. Now, one of the interesting things about these ducks is that once the pair establishes that pair bond and they do fly off, the female is the one that seeks and establishes the nest site. The male usually will hang around near her until about halfway through the incubation period. She actually is the one that not only selects the nest site, but builds the nest as well. The nest is usually a conglomeration of rotting aquatic vegetation, reeds, leaves, things of that sort. And then she adds to the mix a lot of down from her breast so that this very large, bulky nest is usually placed either on rafts of floating vegetation, as you can see in the lower left, or mounted high within the reeds and grasses of a marsh. Now, the female will lay generally 7 to 12 olive gray eggs, and she incubates these eggs by herself for a period of about 23 to 28 days. At hatching, the precocial young are able to leave the nest soon after hatching, within a couple of hours, and the female will then lead the young to food sources, and they themselves, the young, feed themselves. They don't actually rely on the female to provide food for them. Now, one of the interesting things regarding nesting is that quite often redhead females will dump their eggs in the nest of the canvasback, but not to be undone, the female canvasback will do the same to redheads as well. Once in a while, a ruddy duck female will get in on the action, and ruddy duck females will occasionally lay their eggs in both redhead and canvasback nests as well. Pretty interesting to see the reaction of the females once these little ducklings start hatching. But it's interesting that the female will actually take care of them. Now, it's also interesting to mention here that halfway through the incubation period, the males separate themselves from proximity to the females and form bachelor flocks. It is at that time that the males molt. They go through their molting period. They don't approach or go near land at any time during that point because they are flightless during that period. Now, while the female is incubating her eggs, that is when she goes through her molt. The males don't get back with the females again until on their wintering grounds. Females will stay with the chicks for most of the time after they have hatched for several weeks, and then she actually abandons them and allows the chicks to until the chicks fledge at about 60 to 70 days. That's when they're able to actually fly. But the females will abandon the young about a few weeks after they've hatched. And then the young are able to not only attain flight, but they also have innately know how to locate the wintering grounds on their own, which is no mean feat considering that they're not being accompanied by the adults in that process. So pretty interesting bird, pretty interesting biology about them. In closing, the oldest canvasback on record is, believe it or not, 22 years, 7 months old. As far as conservation measures go, canvasback populations have fluctuated widely since the 1950s. Low numbers in the 1980s put the canvasback on species special concern list, but the numbers increased greatly in the 1990s. Fluctuation in numbers are likely due to wetland loss and to changes in water level that reduce the numbers of available nest site. The suggestion is that the canvasback did well in wet years and poorly in dry years. And so there's a lot more interesting information to be had on the canvasback. If you guys are interested, check them out on the internet. But that's our presentation on the canvasback for the month. And we'll be happy to field any questions anyone may have.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat for Clive. We have a couple of questions, are kind of related. They have to do with opening. So Clive, the questions are from Sherry Patillo and from Julia Norris. And Sherry wants to know, how does a canvasback open a mussel? And Julia wants to know, how do they open a clam? I mean, I would use a clam knife. That's what I used to use when I was
Believe it or not, they actually swallow these whole, and the digestive juices in their intestinal tract is able to break down the shell of both the mussels and the clams, so they're able to absorb the protein from the meat on the inside, and then they excrete the shells afterwards. So their digestive juices are quite powerful in breaking those shells down.
Wow. I'm the marvel of evolution. That is
amazing. Oh, yes.
So I don't have any other questions. If you do have a question, please type it in the chat soon. I don't see any more yet about the canvasback, this gorgeous duck. I mean, it's just such a stunning, stunning duck.
Yeah, they really are, and their biology is so interesting too. Their interaction with other species, their migration, Yeah, really, really neat duck. If the audience gets a chance in the late winter, early spring to get out and do some waterfowl observations, they're a good bird to add to the list.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Clive. Kay Gates says thank you as well. We're so glad you're back with us, and
It's good to be back.
yes, yes. And you sound like you're a little nasal, probably allergies, I suspect.
Yes, yes. Allergies. I'm experiencing a very challenging period with allergies within the last 2 weeks. It's one of the toughest ones I've had.
Well, we hope you feel better, Clive, and we hope those
Thank you.
allergies go away soon. Thank you
Thank
so much, and we will see you next month, Clive, okay?
All right, I'll
For
be here.
for another new bird of the month. All
You
right,
got it.
so let me share my screen real quickly. All right, so
Your screen's not shared.
it is.
Now
I
it
think
is.
Okay, thank you so much, Fred. If you have any questions for our feature presenter, I should have showed the screen before, actually, before Clive presented as well. Please put them in the chat at the bottom of your tab, and we will try to get to all of your questions this evening. So, whoops. We have for our feature presenter tonight is Tyler Beck, and we have our own Autumn Coyote, who, as you elected her to the board tonight, which we're very proud of. We're very glad to have her. She will be introducing Tyler, and she will be assisting him with fielding questions during and at the end of his presentation. So Autumn, it's all yours.
Thanks, Scott. So, hey, everybody. So I'm really excited about Tyler Beck today because we're talking about snail kites, and snail kites are very close to our hearts here at Audubon Everglades. But let me tell you a little bit about Tyler before he starts. He grew up in Lake Placid, Florida. His parents were both educators. He got a bachelor's degree in biology from Florida Gulf Coast University, and then he interned working with scrub jays, another bird that I love, at the Avian Ecology Lab at the Archibald Biological Station. And then he worked at FAU, tracking great egrets and white ibis movements and habitat selection in the Everglades. And he stayed on at FAU to get his master's, where his thesis research was on the characteristics of the unique avian communities of the Everglades stormwater treatment areas, which we know about. In 2011, he joined the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to work on wetland restoration and bird monitoring at Lake Okeechobee. And then now we're here for the past 7 years. He's been the Snail Kite Conservation Coordinator for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where his main focus is the management of the snail kite habitat, which is what he's going to talk about today. So Tyler, you're up.
Thank you, Autumn. Give me a second to share my screen. Normally I do these presentations and I don't know anybody, but this crowd, I actually know a couple people. So it's a little more daunting, I guess. Let's see, where is my presentation? It's the wrong screen. Okay. Can you see the full screen presentation now?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. So, like Autumn said, my name is Tyler Beck. I'm the Snail Kite Conservation Coordinator for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And, so my job is pretty unique because I really get to focus on the one species. I dabble a little bit in a couple other imperiled species, but my main focus really is on snail kites. And the reason that we have one position dedicated just to this one species is because the FWC really manages a great deal of the snail kites full range in Florida. There isn't many places where they nest that we don't at least have a hand in either managing the habitat directly or advising on water levels or in some way just having some hand in the management of that area. So my responsibilities with this position are to work with our aquatic habitat managers, and not just FWC's aquatic habitat managers, but with other agencies as well, to ensure that the agency's actions support snail kite recovery. I disseminate snail kite nesting information that I've acquired from, I work with the University of Florida and the Avian Research Conservation Institute. And I get that information back out to habitat managers in forms that they can use and to make sure they can do their jobs effectively and without negatively affecting snail kites. I coordinate very closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Since snail kites are a federally endangered species, they are the lead enforcement agency of the Endangered Species Act. And I develop and secure funding for snail kite research programs, and I manage some of the contracts for those research programs. I'm also a subject matter expert for the Cape Sable seaside sparrow, and I'm trying to brush up on also black rails is another species I'm starting to work with as well. So the Everglades snail kite is a wetland dependent raptor. It was listed as endangered in the precursor to the Endangered Species Act in 1967. It is a subspecies of snail kites. The overall species also persists in Cuba, Central America, and South America, but it's thought that there is not any population swapping, any movement between populations anywhere outside of Florida. They are an extreme dietary specialist. They have historically foraged almost exclusively on Florida apple snails. The species as a whole pretty much specializes in snails in the Pomacea, in the genus Pomacea. People really underestimate the mobility of these birds, though. They're highly mobile and they're capable of making pretty large scale movements. We see some pretty big movements here in Florida, but I looked at some of the movements of the South American subspecies, and I mean they can make movements that would equate to a bird going from here to New York and back, you know, in a season with no problem. Their habitat requirements are a mix of sparsely vegetated open water. That's where they forage, and then they nest in dense or woody vegetation. And their traditional breeding season is from March through June, although that isn't really holding true so much anymore in Florida. Recent population increases in the snail kite can be partially attributed to the establishment of an invasive snail, Pomacea maculata. And I'll cover a lot of that in this talk. So these are just kind of renditions of pictures of what, you know, typically good snail kite habitat would be. Sparsely vegetated, but you know there needs to be vegetation there. Heterogeneous, so there's some open water, there's some sparsely vegetated, and then you know in some of these patches you can see some dense vegetation, maybe even a bit of woody vegetation. For nesting, they can nest in just about anything that'll hold their nest up, like cypress trees, palm trees, cattail, bulrush, button bush, you name it, they will nest in it. But the main requirement is that the substrate is over or at least surrounded by water. And the reason for this is that being over and surrounded by water really affords them protection from a lot of their nest predators. And the nest site needs to maintain water underneath it through the dry season while their nest is active, which is roughly about 2 months. So on the left, you can kind of see the historic range of the snail kites in Florida. The gray area is kind of where we would typically find them, but they have been documented nesting in most of Peninsular and even in parts of the panhandle of Florida. And on the right is eBird locations from just this year. I took this image today. So these are places where people have reported snail kites just this year. So they pretty much moved back into majority of their historic range, although I wouldn't say that part of the St. Johns River, which is on the eastern side of Florida there, they do still inhabit the very upper St. Johns, which is actually the southern portion there, the St. Johns headwaters. But we don't really find them much in the middle St. Johns, closer to Lake George. So we know a lot of, oh, sorry. Okay. So this is kind of a population trend of snail kites starting in 1997 when we really started getting good records of snail kites and a good handle on what their population was like. And shortly after we did that, there were some pretty major population declines. And these coincided with droughts, but also the droughts affected the kites so poorly or so devastatingly because we weren't really managing the habitat all that well then. And so that's kind of about the time where my agency decided we need to dedicate more resources to this, and they established my position. We know so much about snail kite populations and movements and all that stuff because the program that was established in 1982, the monitoring program for snail kites, it was designed by the Florida Co-op Unit, the University of Florida, Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, and the University of Miami. And the main part of it consists of 6 interannual surveys by airboat. They're roughly spaced about 3 weeks apart. They started in March. They're currently on the second of those 6 right now. And the purpose of them is to get a good estimate of the population trends. During these surveys, the University of Florida teams travel through wetlands in airboats and document every kite they see. They also, while they're there, they look for signs of nesting, and every nest that they find or every sign of the nest they find, they document with coordinates and will return in subsequent trips. As those nests progress, they will ban the nestlings when they get to a certain age, and so then those birds can be then identified later on.
Want to take a look at it?
Question?
Well, sure.
So these are some examples of banded birds. They come in different colors and different orientations, depending on who banded the bird, when they banded the bird. Typically right now, most of the younger birds have blue bands on them. And generally there is a number and letter on the band. And so if you see a bird with a band like this, well, they also have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band as well, but that band you can't read unless you have the bird in your hand. The other band is designed to be able to be read, by a good picture or through a spotting scope or being close enough to the bird. If you're lucky enough to get close enough to a bird or good enough image of a bird to read this band, you can always email the picture to me or what you see on the band, including the orientation of the band, the number letter combination, and the colors of the band. And I can reach out to the University of Florida who manages the database, and we can tell you a little bit about that bird. So the snail kite's main food source, snails in the genus Pomacea. The Florida apple snail is our native species. Its average size is 1.5 to 2 inches, about the size of a golf ball. Its lifespan is a year to a little over a year. It can lay 40 to 70 eggs in a clutch, and those eggs are shown here. They're the white ones at the top here, the larger eggs. They are not as drought or flood tolerant as are the invasive maculata, and they have a much narrower diet breadth than the invasive maculata. So the invasive Pomacea maculata, some people call it the island apple snail or the channel apple snail. It was introduced into Lake Toho in Orange County or in Osceola County in 2001 and spread throughout the state pretty quickly after that. Its average size is 3 to 4 inches, so it is much larger than the invasive or than the native apple snail, as you can see by the pictures on the left. Its lifespan is also longer. It can live 3 to 4 years, and it can lay over 2,000 eggs in a clutch, as you can see by those pinkish eggs shown in the picture. It is much more drought and flood tolerant than the native apple snail, and it has a much broader diet breadth than the native apple snail.
So we have a question about the snails.
Yes.
So the larger snail, we know it's exotic. Is it considered invasive?
Yes, it's considered invasive, but we consider things that are invasive generally all negative, but I think I'll show you in this talk that they are not every aspect of the invasive snail is negative, especially for snail kites. This is just some data from our fisheries unit. They started seeing those pink eggs pop up when they were doing their fish and vegetation surveys across the lakes. The first one was in 2006, and you can see these couple pale pink dots. And as I play this, you'll see the map start to fill in as they documented these invasive apple snails in different lakes across Florida up to, I think this stops in 2017, this data set. So they spread pretty quickly throughout the state. Okay. So this caused a couple changes with the apple snails. One that's being shown here is from every year we get an annual snail kite report from the University of Florida from all their monitoring projects. And what this is showing is you can see the different colored bars that kind of changed over the years. The majority of snail kite nesting used to occur in the Everglades. But right around 2002, when they introduced, when those snails were introduced, the nesting really started to shift to the Kissimmee River Valley up by Orlando. And that's because the exotic apple snails really exploded up there. And since then, we've had a couple, or they've had years where they've had a lot of nesting in Okeechobee, in the STAs for a while. And now it's kind of a mix between the Kissimmee River Valley and some other areas around. Okeechobee generally has good years every couple of years in addition.
Tyler, could you speak up just a little bit, or maybe lean in closer to your mic for us?
Sure.
Awesome.
Okay, this is better. Okay, so this is more data from the UF annual reports, and what this is basically showing, each one of these sets of bars is a different region around Florida where we have snail kites, and as the bars become hatched with the lines on them, that means that area was invaded by the Pomacia maculata. But one of the shifts that occurs in a lot of these areas is that apparent juvenile survival of young that have just fledged their nest for their first year of life really seems to increase as areas got invaded by these invasive apple snails. At the time of this study, these invasive apple snails hadn't reached some areas like the Everglades and some of the St. John's marshes represented by the E and the M areas. Another interesting study, this is a couple of years ago, this came out. When they're monitoring birds and you get a bird in hand, one of the things that people that work with birds always do is they always take 100 measurements of a bird when they do it, because you never know how that information is going to be used. And one of the things that they've found when they look back at this is as areas got invaded by these invasive apple snails, the snails morphologically, or the kites morphologically, some of their dimensions started getting larger, including the length of their beaks, and this is all relative to their tarsus length, and they were fledging at higher weights. So there were these morphological changes that were occurring with snail kites as their areas got invaded by snail kites. Now, this isn't necessarily evolution on this time scale. It's a little too fast for that to happen. This is more probably phenotypic plasticity, or maybe they were getting better nutrition from eating these larger snails, and so they were having larger body masses and maybe growing larger bills. Interestingly, most of the other subspecies of snail kites are larger than our Florida ones, and they also do consume these larger apple snails in their native range. So it's kind of like the birds were kind of converging to the other subspecies that ate the similar prey. So these invasive snails also, the native snails are most abundant during the March through June typical snail kite nesting season. That's when the native snails are reproducing and most active and most available to snail kites. But the exotic apple snails don't really follow that pattern, and they can be active at any any time of the year. And we really see that in a shift in snail kite nesting activity. So the black line here is kind of showing what the 1998-99 average snail kite nesting season was like. And this kind of coincided from March to June kite nesting. And then that kite nesting after 2011 to the 2013 really expanded out later in the year. And we started getting kite nesting, later in August and September and sometimes even October. And red here is the kite nesting that occurred in 2015. So it really did a phase shift later in the year. And this might not be a big difference, except for, we're Florida and we have a hurricane season that really starts getting going in the August-September timeframe. And we really saw this in 2017 with Hurricane Irma. During the period of Hurricane Irma, we had 54 snail kite nests active in the state that we knew of. Most of those were in Lake Okeechobee. And then Hurricane Irma pretty much went right up the center of the state. And all 54 of those snail kite nests failed, which is a bad thing for snail kite nesting. But what would really be bad if it had a really negative impact on adult snail kites, because if snail kites have pretty low juvenile survivalship. They have low nest success. If you wipe out a couple nests, it's really not going to have a huge impact on the population. But if you start taking breeding adults out of the population, that's when we're going to start really impacting the population. And that's what we saw with the droughts in 97 and 2001. They had an effect on adult survival. So how did adults fare during Hurricane Irma? So this is information that was acquired by the Avian Research and Conservation Institute, which is a nonprofit out of Gainesville. And they specialize in tracking birds, particularly imperiled birds. And they do a lot of swallow-tailed kites, reddish egrets, things like that. At that time, they had 4 satellite transmitters out on snail kites. And you can see one of them was in Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, this blue pin here. And then 2 were in the Immokalee area. And then 1 was in the Lehigh area, just prior to Hurricane Irma coming through. And then as Hurricane Irma came through, the one that was in Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, they're called it Highway 441, because that's close to where it was captured, moved a little closer actually to the track of the hurricane. The others stayed still. And remember, that hurricane came right up through here, right really across these Immokalee birds. And then after the storm, 441 actually came over and joined them. But we still continued to track these birds for a couple months after Hurricane Irma. So they had the hurricane travel right over them, and all 4 survived the storm. So the adult survival, we don't think really was impacted by the hurricane. So that's good to know. A lot of things that we've learned from monitoring snail kites so closely is how managing water levels can really affect snail kites. And these are a bunch of graphs that kind of show the effect of how much water is in a certain water body and how that's going to affect. On the left, it's number of nests initiated. So at certain water levels, kites really want to nest in certain lakes. So we know that information now. What are the optimal water levels in a lot of these water bodies to induce kite nesting? And then on the right, what water levels are best for the nest to survive the breeding season? And so that's information that we're showing there on the right. And we use all this information when we work with hydrologic managers at the various agencies and recommend water levels for the dry season going into hurricane season, and how water should be shuttled around the system. One example of this we saw in Lake Okeechobee in 2018 and 2019. 2018, there were 189 snail kite nests on Lake Okeechobee. And they observed 61 banded birds nesting on Lake Okeechobee in 2018. 189 nests 2018 was the second most recorded nests on in the state of Florida, or for Lake Okeechobee in recent history. So it was a very good year for snail kite nesting there. But in 2019, water levels on Lake Okeechobee were 3 to 4 feet lower than they were in 2018, and conditions were not conducive to nesting. We didn't get any nesting on Lake Okeechobee. But where did those birds go that nested on Lake Okeechobee the year before? And they really kind of went a little bit of everywhere. You know, at least 3 of them hung around, stayed on Okeechobee, even though they didn't nest, they still wanted to stay there. 6 of them were in the Everglades and Water Conservation Area 3A, 2 went to Grassy Waters, 1 went to Lake Hashtanaha, 2 to Lake Estapoga, 3 to Lake Kissimmee, 10 to the St. John's Marsh, 6 to Toho, and 1 went all the way up to Paynes Prairie near Gainesville. So 51 birds were resighted that nested in Okeechobee in 2018 in other wetlands. Only 10 of those birds, though, were observed nesting again the next year. And of those 10, so they showed a much lower breeding probability, only a 20% breeding probability the next year, when the average is about 40%. And they had, of those birds that did nest, they only had about a 30% nest success, when other birds that year had about a 42% nest success that year. So having these big drying events on these big important wetlands and forcing birds to move to other areas can really have a detrimental effect on their productivity. Some of the ways we manage forest snail kites, some of these areas take a lot of management to control invasive plants, to keep navigation areas open, to keep recreation going. Like these are major bass fishing areas, duck hunting areas, recreational boating areas, sightseeing areas. So it takes a lot of effort to manage a lot of these wetlands. One of the ways that we do it is when University of Florida does a survey, they send me the information of where they found nests and what the status of those nests are. I take that information and create these rings around the nests called buffers. And this kind of tells our habitat managers what they can and can't do around snail kite nests. The smaller red rings are no entry buffer, and this is roughly about the distance that a snail kite nest will become disturbed from its nest, or snail kite pair will become disturbed from their nest. And so we consider this a no entry buffer. We don't go into these areas while these kites are nesting. The larger yellow circles are our habitat modification buffers. We try to not do any work that's going to impact snail kite, particularly foraging habitat within these, because this basically represents the average distance a kite will go to find food to bring back to its nest. So we try to keep conditions around that nest similar to how when the bird established that nest for the time that bird's nesting. I do this for all areas around the state, other than those ones that are managed by the South Florida Water Management District. And because biologists like Natasha and her coworkers do that themselves.
Tyler, what's the diameter of the buffer zone?
Yeah, good question. The smaller red, the no entry buffer is 500 feet or about 150 meters. And then the larger yellow one, the habitat buffer is 500 meters. So they can really take up quite a big area when you get a lot of snail kite nests on a lake. And what I'm showing here is Lake Toho, which is up by the city of Kissimmee in Osceola County. So another thing that we've gathered from all this snail kite information that we're getting is where kites really like to nest. Particularly on Lake Okeechobee, we recognize that a disproportionate amount of snail kite nesting was occurring at about the 12.5 to 13.5 foot elevation on the lake. So they really preferred that area of the lake, but not all of that area was really available for snail kite nesting. A lot of that area was filled in with dense vegetation like cattails and other things. There's also a historically productive area on Lake Okeechobee called Moonshine Bay. And it happened to be really at this 12.5 to 13.5 foot contour. And this is historic vegetation data on the right here showing this map. And all the orange is spike rush, which is really good snail kite foraging vegetation. But as, and this is from 1973, data from 1973. By 1996, we were starting to lose spike rush and really starting to pick up a lot more water lily and cattail in that area. And then by 2012, the area had mostly filled in with cattail. And cattail is good for snail kite nesting, but we need just a little bit of it for them to nest in, and most of the other, we need open vegetation like spike rush. And so our habitat manager decided to do something about this area and try to restore it back to its previous open heterogeneous landscape. And so in 2015, we did a large herbicide project where we killed a lot of the cattails. And then later that year, we came in and burned it and opened it back up. And pretty much immediately, we noticed a response with snails laying eggs in the area. A lot of snail egg clusters started showing up, and then snail kites kind of showed up in the area. And we hadn't had snail kites nesting in this area in really since we've started doing the heart of the monitoring program in about 1996. Although we knew historically it was a good snail kite nesting area. And so the following year, 2016, was the best snail kite nesting year on record for Lake Okeechobee. And majority of the kites that nested on Lake Okeechobee nested in Moonshine Bay. And we had a much higher proportion of successful nests in the Moonshine Bay treatment area than occurred in the rest of Lake Okeechobee. So the area really seemed to be very successful at rehabilitating for snail kite nesting. We also do hydrologic drawdowns in some areas, and this is East Lake Toho. It's just to the east of Lake Toho that I showed before. And because a lot of these lakes have been hydrologically secured, where their water levels are tightly regulated, and then people have built houses very close to the lake, they would typically, prior to all this, fluctuate 5 to 6 feet in a year. And this really did a great job of managing the habitat and maintaining those heterogeneous vegetation communities. Now they only fluctuate, a good lake will fluctuate 3 feet. Some lakes only fluctuate 1 to 1.5 feet a year. So in order to combat the negative effects of this water stabilization, we've done extreme drawdowns where we really draw the lake down, and then we get out with mechanical equipment and do a lot of work. And we recently did one of these on East Lake Toho. And so you can see how one of the problems with doing this drawdown, though, is that water flows out of East Lake Toho and into West Lake Toho. And we can't draw this lake down because eventually it's going to reach the same level as West Lake Toho. And so we had to install pumps and come up with special lake regulation schedules. So it was really a big project. But the Fish and Wildlife Service really wanted to know what is going to be the effect of taking all the water out of the snail kite nesting lake for a year. And so we started a project where we track juvenile snail kites. And we would go, at the time when they would band the snail kites in the nest, we put on these, we call them GSM transmitters. They basically use our cell phone networks to transmit GPS data of these birds every hour of the day. And so we get a lot of really great information from this. And so this is an example of just 3 birds that we tagged in 2018. You can see there's a purple dot up here on East Lake Toho. There's actually 2 dots, a red one and a yellow one here on Lake Kissimmee. And over the next couple of months, remember these are just fledgling birds. We put these transmitters on before they can fly. And so they're very young, naive birds. But as soon as they really leave the nest, you see, they can really move great distances. A lot of times they'll do these kind of looping sweeps where they will fly out away from their nesting area and then come back. And then, but if they find a good area, then they'll stay for a while. And so the two of these birds really cued in on the Kissimmee River this year. And then eventually all three of them found the Kissimmee River because 2018 was a pretty wet year. And so we had a lot of water on the floodplain of the Kissimmee River that year. So it's really cool to get to watch these birds move around and see how they use the landscape. So that was those three birds there. And so that's here on the left is the tracks that are just of those three birds the first couple months. And then the first year of life on the right is what I'm showing there. So they can really move around quite a bit. And we see their movement is a lot more erratic the first year of life. And we think that they're really just exploring, learning the landscape. They don't know what's out there. It's kind of hit or miss. If they don't find something, hopefully they can make it back to their natal wetland or an area that they know is good. Later on in life, they really seem to make much more direct movements in between areas that they know. And this is just the tracks of all the birds that we tracked through this project. We're going to tag our last three birds this year, but we've tagged 40 something birds in this. So, some of the birds really tend to get lost. This bird here made it all the way to Macon, Georgia, in this orange line here, and then turned around and came back and made it back to near Orlando. This bird unfortunately went all the way to South Carolina and we presume died because it couldn't find any snails up there. But a lot of them, wander around and find areas like Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, Paynes Prairie, the Upper St. Johns Marsh, and then kind of get a mental map of what is out there on the landscape. Other work that's been done by University of Florida, they put game cameras on nests, and you can see there's a nest here. It's on the left side of this picture, and then the pole is holding a camera up at the top there, looking down into the nest. And one of the things we really learn about this is what kinds of things cause snail kite nests to fail. Only about a third to a half of snail kite nests are successful, meaning they fledge at least one chick in any given year. So there's a great deal of failure of snail kite nests. It's kind of a natural part of their ecology, but we still try to maximize kite nest success as much as we can. And so this study showed that, of the nests that failed, predation was the #1 cause of nest failure, followed by abandonment, and then things like unviable eggs and accidents and collapse. We used to think the collapse was a much bigger issue with snail kite nests because a lot of the nests that we would find would just be looked like they were falling over and everything came out of them. But what we learned with these nest trials is that a lot of times what really happens is that a predator like a raccoon or something will reach up into the nest and pull the nest down and pull the eggs or chicks down to it. And what we were thinking was a weak nest, a nest collapse, or a storm knocked it over was really still predators. So this lets us know, managing predators' ability to get to these nests is a really good way to help aid nest success. So what's getting in these nests? What's really affecting them? And turns out the yellow rat snakes is by far the #1 thing that predates snail kite nests. But it could be any number of things that get into a nest, even an alligator, marsh rice rats, raccoons. We had a cottonmouth, a great horned owl, and even a purple gallinule will depredate a nest. So really anything that can and will get into snail kite nests will eat the eggs. This is why water level management is very important, because a lot of these predators can't get to nests or can't move around freely between nest patches when water levels are high enough. these are just some examples of what we saw getting into kite nests during this study. So now I'm just going to talk about the kind of the current state of snail kite nesting. So this is, on the left is a map of all the known snail kite nests of 2021. And highlighted on the right now is the Kissimmee chain of lakes with East Lake Toho, I showed at the top, Lake Toho and Lake Kissimmee. It was a pretty good nesting year in the Kissimmee chain of lakes last year. Lake Okeechobee and surrounding areas had a decent year, although Lake Okeechobee itself had a lot of nests, but very poor success because we had a lot of nests because the water level is relatively high, but that also creates a flood concerns with hurricane season coming. And so they actually also had to reduce water levels pretty quickly, which is then bad for snail kite nests and allows predators to get to their nests. Other important areas around Lake Okeechobee, though, to the southwest is South Florida Water Management District impoundment called Lake Hickpachee, or Lake Hickpachee impoundment. It is a treatment wetland, and snail kites found it last year and nested in it like crazy last year. Also, the new C44 reservoir and STA had a lot of kite nests in it. They were very successful in that area as well. There's another treatment wetland on the north east side of Lake Okeechobee called, sorry, I'm drawing a blank, Lakeside Ranch. It had a couple snail kite nests in it. And then there's another one that I didn't picture, but it's the A1 FEB or A1 flow equalization basin that its purpose is to hold water for feeding into the stormwater treatment areas of the Everglades. Between the Lakeside Ranch, C44, Lake Hickpachee, and the A1 FEB, those areas accounted for nearly half of the nesting statewide. So these impounded areas, at least when they're first established, can really support a great deal of snail kite nesting. We also had some nesting in Hungryland, a couple nests that were not successful, and a little bit of nesting in Loxahatchee Slough, which was down because the past couple of years we've had some really good nesting occur in Loxahatchee Slough. As far as the Everglades went, we had a handful of nests in the Everglades, a couple nests in southwestern WCA 3A. We want to get more nesting in the water conservation areas and the Everglades. We're struggling to do that with the amount of water that's available or water level management and various other things. The other thing about the Everglades is that it's not very good at producing these exotic apple snails that like the other areas because the water quality is much better in the Everglades and they're not as productive to produce a lot of the exotic apple snails. One bright spot is that a lot of the recent Everglades restoration projects, like larger structures to move water into Everglades National Park, removing of the Tamiami Trail, and building bridges across Alligator Alley to let water sheet flow better, at least initially seems to be paying off in more snail kite nesting in Everglades National Park. It's going to take a couple more years to really see if that trend holds true, but at least last year we had a decent number of nests in Everglades National Park.
So Tyler, what kind of environmental cues are the kites looking for when they're looking for nests and foraging areas? Like what makes some areas more attractive?
I mean, the main thing is number of snails. They want to see a density of snails that's going to support a nest within close range of where they put their nest. So that's really the biggest thing. And that's what a lot of areas now are really doing is a lot of these impounded wetlands, when they first flooded, something about these exotic snails really like newly flooded areas. They really seem to have a population explosion. The kites are great at identifying that, moving in and creating nests. The Everglades, we haven't solved the snail production conundrum in the Everglades though. The habitat, the structure, the foraging, there's plenty of nesting substrate in the Everglades. It's all looks really good for snail kites in the Everglades. They just don't have the snail population that we're seeing in some of these other areas. And so how it breaks down statewide, and this is over the last 11 years. For last year, we're looking at the green bars, not great nesting in the Everglades, some good nesting in the impounded areas for stormwater treatment areas and other areas like that. Decent year on Lake Okeechobee, although success rate was low. Kissimmee Chain of Lakes had an okay year. And then other encapsulates a lot of those other impounded wetlands that aren't associated with the Everglades. We had a lot of nesting in there. And so 21 stacked up is really a decent year for number of snail kite nests over the last years, only third to 2016 and 2018, and decent success, probably third also in recent history. And so I showed you this before, but I had this right portion grayed out. Snail kites have really kind of been on the increase over the last, almost decade and a half, ever since the crash in 2007. We've had a lot of variability these last couple years. So you guys are actually the first of the public to really see this image, because I just got it sent to me last week. And so this is a new population estimate for 2021 that they just are going to come out with in their new report in about a month, which is about 3,171 birds, which is a pretty good increase, from about 500 birds from the year before. So we're pretty happy about that. We were actually just expecting a population decline because year 2000 was a pretty poor nesting year, and usually decreases in population follow poor nesting years, but that's not what we saw this year. So we have some kind of figuring out to see why we didn't see a population decline this year like we expected, but hey, we'll take the population increase either way. And so if anybody has any more questions, I'd love to answer them.
Cool, great. That was awesome. We feel super special because we got the lowdown on the secret math.
Yeah.
So the very last question that came into the chat just before we stopped was about this, actually about the snails, and if there are studies being done on the snails that they eat.
Yeah, there are studies being done, not as many as we would like. The problem with studying the snails is that it's not like studying the birds where you go out and you see the bird, you document the bird, you may see their nest, you document their nest. The snails are really hard to find. The kites do such a good job of finding them, but if we go out and we try to find them, they can be really tough to find other than their egg clusters. And so we're doing a couple of things. Well, the way you really monitor snails is that you take a 1 meter by 1 meter box and you throw it into the marsh, and then you take nets and you scoop it until you're sure there's not a snail in there, or if there's snails, you catch them and you say, okay, there's one snail in this 1 square meter. And then you do that about 50 times for an area, and then you have an estimate of how many snails are in that one area.
Yes.
It's a very labor intensive, tough process. So,
seriously.
We're trying to get a good handle on if we can count snail egg clusters and have a good metric of how well that means how many snails are in the area. And we're kind of having some mixed results with that, some positive, some negative. We can get a general idea of, if there's an okay amount of snails in the area, if there's a lot of snail egg clusters, but it doesn't give us a real metric of this is how many snails are in this area and whether it will support snail kite nesting.
Yeah.
I just watched a presentation today of a graduate student from Florida Atlantic University, and he did some experiments where he had tethered snails in a controlled environment at Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, and did a couple other things, and he did some really great work, and we're learning a lot of stuff about snail movement and production with that. We're studying it. It's just snails are very hard to study and very hard to understand what's going on with them.
And since we're talking about snails still, somebody wanted to know if they can introduce the eggs into a place with low nesting, and would you even want to do that?
No, because they are still an invasive species, we don't want to move them into areas where they're not. We don't discourage them really in areas where they are. And in fact, some of our management actions are probably encouraging their populations in areas where they already are. But we don't want to move them into areas where they're not, because we're still not sure about, there is some evidence to suggest, pretty work that Mark Cook has done to suggest that part of the problem we're having with native apple snails is they're being inhibited by these exotic apple snails in some way. So if there's an area that doesn't have exotic apple snails, then yeah, please let's not encourage them to move around. They're there somehow anyways, because they seem to move around really well, but let's not make that happen.
And we can't figure out how. So if the subspecies of the birds are larger, then somebody wants to know, do they have a more varied diet? Because she photographed an adult bird feeding on a crab in Brazil.
I don't know a whole lot about how much varied the rest of the population's diet is, but I know that it's still primarily Homacea apple snails. Even here in Florida, though, they don't exclusively feed on snails. Every once in a while, they'll catch a small turtle, or I've heard of them feeding on crayfish if they can catch them. They're just so specialized at catching the snails that that's almost exclusively what they eat. I think that the difference in size with the rest of the species is primarily eating the larger snail generally. And maybe that aids their larger movement habits as well.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so someone was asking about the size of their claws, that, how long their claws are. What are they used for?
Yeah, they, I have a picture of that somewhere, if I can pull it up. They have really, really long talons, amazingly long talons. And you would think they look really fearsome. Actually, I think, let me see, maybe it's shown in one of these.
I think it was back in the beginning.
Yeah.
There it is. Wait, oh no, keep going.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, look how long these talons are. They're just incredibly, they look really fierce, and they would really mess you up. Any other raptor, if they got a hold of you, it would just puncture a hole right through your hand. I've had a snail kite grab my hand right in the soft part between my thumb and my pointer finger. And yeah, it hurt a little bit, but it didn't even break the skin. Because they really just feed on snails, they don't need really strong talons. But those claws are made to just wrap around the snails and hold onto them to be able to pull them up out of the vegetation.
Cool. So, what's their lifespan? 20 something? What is their lifespan?
Yeah, we've recorded, because of this banding program, we have documented birds, I want to say 24, 25 years old before. Yeah, their reproductive effort really declines after about 12 years, but they can live to be pretty old.
Cool.
I saw a bird week before last. I was on Lake Toho, and I think it was a 13-year-old bird that was up there.
Cool. So now going back to like the water levels, somebody was wondering if the optimal water levels for snail kites, are they good or bad for other Florida nesting birds? Or do you know?
Well, no, yeah, we know quite a bit about that, and different birds have obviously different requirements. Different birds also, so for wading birds, for example, they also pretty much require substrate with water underneath it and to keep that water underneath it. But in the Everglades, what they also require is for that water to be gradually reducing and going down into smaller and smaller pools. And that takes those little fish of the Everglades and really concentrating them down into small pools, and just becomes a feeding frenzy for these birds that they can then supply to their nests. So snail kites don't really require the reducing of water levels like that, but so they generally tend to nest in deeper areas than wading birds will. But they still both need water underneath their nest throughout their nesting cycle.
Right. And someone's interested to know, like, do the I'm trying to figure out how to put this question. They're just asking, do the Army Corps of Engineers lowering the water levels, does that override protected endangered bird welfare?
It does when it means a threat to human health and safety. So if we're going into hurricane season and Lake Okeechobee water levels are high enough that a hurricane might cause a breach in the Herbert Hoover Dike, then they're gonna prioritize human health and safety over an endangered species.
Right.
We work with them to try to, get ahead of that and try to not let that happen. But sometimes Mother Nature, sometimes we're fighting against Mother Nature in those things.
Right.
These lakes also all have water regulation schedules, and when you make one of the water regulation schedules, you have to do an assessment of the endangered species that might be affected by that. And in those plans, they work out the amount of endangered species that may be affected by those plans, and they're allowed to negatively affect a certain amount of that species. But if they go over that amount, then they could be in violation of the endangered species. So it's a pretty complicated and convoluted system, but it's all, there's a balance between managing these areas for all the different needs, water supply, recreation, endangered species, habitat, everything that needs the water. Every year is it's a series of negotiations about these things going on.
Right. And then, so of course there's an amount of acceptable loss. So we're over time. So I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to ask two more questions. Wait, I'm going to ask two more. The first is, so their beaks, they've evolved these longer beaks. Have the talons evolved in length as well?
Yeah, I think that was part of the, I think they did find that in the study, that they're slightly longer talons over the couple of years since the introduction of the invasive apple snail.
And then, and our last
These are
question.
relatively small differences, so they're not huge differences, but they're statistically significant.
Yeah, so this is not the question I was going to ask you, but is it visual? Like, is it noticeable like right away when you look at them, or do you actually have to measure it to be able to see it?
They had to take thousands of measurements in order to tell. Yeah, you can't notice just by looking at them.
Okay, and so final question, because people are hungry. They're wondering, what does the bird's beak, what part does it play, and how does that curved beak get the snail out of the shell?
Yeah, so that beak is just nicely curved, and it's pretty sharp at the tip. Sometimes they pull this kind of trap door thing they have on their shell called the operculum. Sometimes they pull that off first, and then they reach in on this side of the shell, and the meat of the shell attaches, around here in the shell. Or the snail attaches about here in the shell, and their bill is just perfectly curved to get in there and just snip that off right where it attaches, and then they can pull the whole meat of the snail out.
How cool. Cool. Well,
limpkins eat a lot of apple snails as well. Limpkins might pull the operculum off and pull the meat out, but they also sometimes will hammer a hole in the shell and then snip it like that. So if you find a snail shell with a hole in it, it was probably a limpkin that did it. But if you find just the snail shell without the hole, it could have been either a limpkin or a snail kite that ate that.
Cool. Cool. That's like our nature detective work.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people think if it's not a hole, then it wasn't a limpkin, but limpkins don't always do the.
But it could be. You never know. You got to see it with your eyeballs.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was awesome. I'm going to throw it back over to Scott to wrap it up for us. This was really great. I love snail kites. This was super interesting. I just love how perfectly their bill fits right in that shell. It's pretty awesome. So Scott, you want to take it?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Autumn. And thank you so much, Tyler. It was such a great presentation. It was so informative. I particularly love that last question and your description of how the snail kites actually use their beak to get the snail out of the shell. I've always been wondering that myself. I'm so fascinated by snail kites. So that was really a treat. And you know, it's as you know, it's our logo bird. We have the snail kite on so many of our branding materials, and it's a very important bird to our organization. And so it was really delightful to learn so much more about the bird that means so much to Audubon Everglades. Thank you. Thank you again, Tyler.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. So next month, we are going to have Captain Jay Marvin on May 2nd. Kind of one, in a sense, he's one of the heroes of what we value, which is protecting songbirds that we love to see. And he's going to kind of tell us a little bit of the seamier side of what's out there in the world that is going after these songbirds and trying to cage them and sell them off. So it should be a really fascinating presentation. I know he's going to have a lot of visuals for us. So I'm incredibly looking forward to it. I hope you'll join us next month on May 2nd. And until then, happy birding, get out there. Again, it's spring migration. It's a great time to get your binoculars out and get into some of the coastal forested areas where most of these migrants tend to land. And thanks again for joining us tonight. Thanks again for participating in the board slate election and in voting on the 22-23 budget. And again, it was delightful hosting this presentation and being your president. Thanks again. Have a great evening, everybody. See you next month on May 2nd. Good night.
Good night.